Hi there, TactiCon. My name is Keith Burgun. I am a game designer from Brooklyn, New York. I've designed several indie video games over the past 10 to 15 years or so. And I'm also an author. I've written a couple of books on game design. I do podcasts on game design and articles and things like that. You can find out all that kind of stuff about me at my site, keithburgun.net. But today I'm going to be talking about a game that I started in 2019 and released in 2021 called Gem Wizards Tactics, which is on Steam. It's on, let's see if I can full screen this. Yeah, it's on Steam. It's on iOS. It's on Android. It's on actually Switch and Xbox, although I personally didn't do that port. And it's, so it's very cross-platform. It's built in Unity. And it is a turn-based tactical game with a lot of emergent complexity. So like you can dig holes in the ground and knock people into the holes. A lot of it's about knocking monsters off the map. There's a lot of random map generation. There's things like ice tiles, which make you slide further, and the further you slide, the more damage you do. So it's very much about like emergent complexity and taking these rules that are seemingly somewhat simple and then combining them in weird ways to create interesting kind of situations and scenarios and difficult challenges. There is a map editor. There's a campaign mode. There are 5 factions that are completely asymmetrical from each other. There are a bunch of, there's a one-player ranked mode. So something you gotta know about Gem Wizards Tactics is it's a little bit unlike many games that would have the word tactics in their name. Most games that I know of that are called tactics are really kind of in like an RPG tradition, right? So the most famous tactics game is probably Final Fantasy Tactics. And in that game, you have a party and you're going through it. You're going mission to mission to mission, and there's a story, and it's very much guided by that story. And you have a lot of control over like who's in your party, who's not, but you're leveling them up over time. They're getting stronger and you're fighting stronger and stronger enemies. This game is basically not like that. This game, actually, when I started this project, I don't know if anybody here knows the game Fantasy General. Certainly you know about Panzer General, which is one of the most famous tactical hex-based war games for PC. Well, that same company, SSI, went on to make a game called Fantasy General, which I much preferred. I love Fantasy General. And this game was supposed to be in that tradition of actually war games, not so much tactics games. So, and there's not as many examples actually of like modern, high profile war games with like high production values and sort of like video gamey production values. There are definitely still war games, but they're pretty niche inside of a war gamer kind of world, as distinct from something like Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy Tactics, or even Advance Wars. Now, Advance Wars was another big inspiration for this game. Certainly in the aesthetics, like I wanted it to look and have that very like crunchy pixel art look of Advance Wars. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think the game did well, what I think the game didn't do well, or what I could have done better with it. But I'm very proud of what it is overall. This game, I think I should also let you know, pretty much like 99% of everything you see that I've done that is in the game, I personally did it. So I can tell you there's like 5 assets that anyone else made. This intro movie was made by someone else. another artist. This title screen illustration is made by another artist, and one song was made by another artist. Other than that, like and there was a little bit of coding help. There's obviously design help and playtesting help. Like plenty of people from my Discord community helped with all that. But basically, this is a one-man operation. Like, you know, 95 to 99% one-man operation. So that, I think, is also part of an important part of the context. I originally started this game off back in mid-2019, and I wanted it to be actually a 4X game. I was originally going to do a game like Civ. I've for a long time had an idea for those kinds of games. Actually, no one's probably ever heard of this game, and it's taken down off of most stores, but I think you can still find it on Google Play. A game called Empire, the deck building strategy game, which was a weird take on 4X strategy games that I designed for another company. There's a lot of ideas that weren't fully explored there that I was very excited about. So, but then at some point I listened to a podcast with, I think, Soren Johnson, and he was saying, or I forget if it was the podcast with Soren Johnson or when I had John Schaefer on my own podcast, who designed Civ 5. And then later At the Gates, and you know, he was talking about how making At the Gates was like, it almost killed him. It was just way too much work for one person. So I think I got scared off from the idea of making a 4X game. So that's when I switched this project over to like, well, I've always loved Fantasy General. It always has bugged me that no one will ever try Fantasy General. I don't know anybody who likes Fantasy General except for me. And a lot of that's because of the aesthetic. The aesthetic is very dry. It's very gray. It's, you know, compared to something like this. So I always felt like everyone loves Advance Wars. If there was a Fantasy General that had like aesthetics of Advance Wars, everyone would love that. And that was kind of what I was thinking at the start of this project, and why I decided to take the route that I did for it. There's also a story mode. There's a tutorial. There's about 5 different modes plus a map editor. So it's a pretty like full app. So yeah, let me get into what I thought worked in this game and what I thought didn't work. So the thing that I think is, let's talk about what I did think worked in this game. The first thing I do really think works is that the basic gameplay, this concept where you have 5 or 6 units, they each have tactical abilities that push units around, knock units around, it really puts a lot of the complexity onto the grid rather than into the spreadsheet of a character. And it really allows for like emergent, very cool combos. Like I would say this game has the coolest like combo. It makes you feel like a genius when you do these like crazy combos. There's almost always some weird way you could come back. It's really, and that's something that was very important to me and that I'm really glad that we achieved. So I would say that the basic actual gameplay, like once you get into it, once you learn all the rules, and once you're in it, it's like, it's what I wanted. You know, it's not going to be for everybody. We'll talk a little bit about that too, but I'm proud of it. Another thing that I do like is for what narrative and lore and world building type of stuff is in the game. Like I mentioned, this is not an RPG. It's pretty light on that stuff. But for what is there, I'm happy with it. Like I think it's charming. I really like the story mode. And it's short, but I think it's, you know, it's nice. And so I'm proud of that. I like the characters. Right here we have Derby Pocket down here. It's our main character. They're also on the cover art of the game. Yeah, so I'm pretty proud of it. I do think it's like, for me, it's pretty charming. So that's another thing I liked about the game. I'm also very proud of the soundtrack. For me, like I'm a big music person. I went to music school. And for me, a big reason I like to get into game development in the first place was that I had something that I could write music for. And so a lot of times music is the most exciting part, or one of the most exciting parts about making a game for me. And I'm very proud of the Gem Wizards Tactics soundtrack. It's up on YouTube. You can check it out. Just search Gem Wizards Tactics OST. It's on there, the whole playlist. Particularly happy with the Alcove Prefects song, the White Faction. I'm really like that, but I have one guest song on there that's really cool too. But I'm really proud of it. I think it's a really cool, interesting soundtrack. It's not quite like anything else, and some of the best music I think I've written, and I love that. I do think some of the art in the game is very good. So so I did almost all the art. Like actually, basically every pixel you see here, I placed. And I worked really hard to get the good palette for this tile set in particular. This is like the base tile set. And I worked really hard at getting a good palette here. And I think I did. Like, I'm really happy with how that looks. There are some really weird things to the aesthetics, like the fact that you're sort of floating. Your maps are like these floating islands and you can push people off of them. Oh, this, I should mention, this is another asset that was made by an artist, not me. But basically everything else, all the in-game assets were me. There's different tile sets. The snow one, I do like this snowy mountain. I think it looks pretty good. There's some animations. Now, what's funny is I'm an animator, actually. Like, my day job is doing, or it has been for many years, was doing pixel art animation for other people's games. And so I love to do animation, but because I had so many custom units in this game, I didn't really have the bandwidth to also animate them, really. So like, there's a few, I tried to be smart about it. Like when there's a special ability, I would, actually do like a full 8-frame animation. This one is smart because it attacks in a big circle around the character, which means that I only have to do it once from one direction. So it's not like a directional ability, but we do have some of those as well. A lot of the animation, there's a little bit more like procedural stuff that we do. So, obviously as one person trying to make 5 factions, each with completely unique units, plus monsters, plus like some extra units that aren't exactly in a faction. It's a lot for one person to do. But I that was a point of frustration a little bit for me. It was like, I'm an animator. I should really be like doing more animation in this game. And I do think animation is very important in video games. And I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the aesthetic of video games and how that's one of my biggest regrets in this game. But yeah, this actual tile set, these colors, I worked really hard on getting this tile set to look good and to get a good palette. And I did a lot of this on stream, by the way. I was streaming much of the development of Gem Wizard's Tactics, and I think it went well. Yeah. So I'm happy with that. I'm basically happy with how the game looks. I do wish that the UI was pixel art as well. I think that probably would have been the right call. Still, part of me is like, maybe I can go back and do that, which is kind of crazy, but I want to do it. And I should mention, I've been patching this game it was released in February of 2021, and I issued a patch like last month or the month before, like 2 months ago. So I've been doing like patches like crazy for this game. I'm also really happy that this game won a game design award. It won an award for best game design. That was a category for the Unfold Games Awards, which is not like a huge games awards show or whatever. But one of the nice things about sometimes the big awards shows, they kind of just like heap more awards on the things that are already getting tons of awards. Whereas this was a smaller thing, and there was a bunch of indie games that got submitted, almost none of which anyone had heard of. And so it kind of opened the playing field a little bit more, which was nice. But yeah, it was nice to get some recognition for specifically the game design, because I do think that maybe this is like a bit of a game designer's game. It definitely takes some learning to figure out the rules and stuff like that. It's not smooth when you're learning it right up front. It's a little harsh, but I do think there's a lot in here for a designer to appreciate. My last positive thing I'll say about the game, and then I'll get into the fun stuff, is that I'm pretty happy that the production was pretty fast. My previous big game was called Oro, a monster bumping adventure, and we had started that in 2011, and we weren't really like done and released on all the platforms and updated and everything until like 2016. So that was like a 5-year, and then we recoded it from scratch in 2020 in Unity for a bunch of technical reasons. But the point is, like, my games can take a really long time sometimes, like years. And I was pretty happy. This game I started in 2019 from scratch. By early 2021, released it. You know, on launch, it was a lot smaller of a game than it is now. Like I said, I've been updating it a lot. So I guess that can get us into my first regret, actually, which is that I do wish that I had started this game in early access. And actually, maybe it should still be in early access to this day, assuming I didn't get a publisher, which is my next regret, was that I was really not like looking actively for a publisher with this game. I think that was a mistake, probably. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it because part of me is like, would I really be able to get a publisher for this game? It doesn't really, I don't know. It seems, I know a little bit more about publishers and like what they're looking for these days. And I feel like I have a better sense for like what people are kind of interested in. And I do think this is a cool, great game, but I'm not sure I could have got a publisher for it because it's very indie. It's very like roguelike with the randomly generated maps. I don't know. It's possible if my launched version was a demo, then, you know, like, or just called a demo, like it's the same thing, but called an early access demo. And then publishers saw that, maybe I could get a publisher through that. That would be a smart thing to have tried for, but I did not really try for that. And I sort of regret that because I do think in this era of indie game development, and this is something that has kind of changed since I started. I started in about 2007, 2008. And back then, there were so few new indie games coming out that, you know, if you made a cool game, people would come, you know, like it was a big deal. I remember for my first game was called 100 Rogues, and it was on iOS. It was just on iOS originally. And I got contacted by like all kinds of like, you know, websites and blogs and stuff asking me like for interviews and stuff like that. It was like a big deal. Yeah, it was a really big deal when 100 Rogues came out. And honestly, 100 Rogues is like, is a cool game, but it's like, you know, a third of the game that this is in a lot of ways. And so it's just a very different environment. And I really, really think unless you're just making games like purely for yourself and a couple of your friends to play, I really think you should try to make something that needs a publisher. And for one reason, a publisher can give you the marketing budget so that your game can like really exist. I can't tell you how hard I tried to market Gem Wizard's Tactics, just like, you know, the old fashioned way by like posting on forums and Reddit and Facebook groups and all those sorts of things. And, you know, there's a Facebook group that is devoted to turn-based tactical war games. And I posted in there with Gem Wizard's Tactics a dozen times probably. And then I remember putting up a poll a few months later and asking people what they thought of the game. And like the vast majority of them had never heard of the game. So like, there's just, it's the lack of like discoverability that there is for games. At least for, this is just my experience. Like someone else will give you different experience, but I do think it's worth noting that a lot of times the experience that you hear from, we tend to hear from the winners in game development. So like if you watch a GDC talk, here's how to market your game, whatever. A lot of this time, this is from someone who won the lottery, kind of, you know what I mean? Like they sort of happened to get attention or have like a really big successful game. Sometimes that's because their successful game was 10 years ago when the window was more open. Sometimes that is because they actually have some real insights. And sometimes it's just because they, you know, it's just like dumb luck. They knew the right person, or the right person happened to look at it, or a right streamer happened to look at it, or whatever. So there's a lot of those kinds of things. And so I think it's really good to hear from someone who, like, this game was not a financial success. It wasn't as bad as actually most indie games, and I can talk a little bit about that by the end of it. But it, you know, so yeah, this game made about 25 to 30K all told, which like might sound like a lot of money to people who aren't used to this kind of thing. But, you know, I worked on this game like pretty like much my all day, like, you know, my full time, like as a full-time job for a year and a half, something like that, plus having to pay other people to make other assets, and, you know, just all the time involved in getting people to play test and processing feedback. I mean, it's much more than a full-time job. So if you got 30K for, you know, it's really like I made like way less than minimum wage. So it's not a financial success. That said, a lot of indie games end up making like $1,000 total or less, you know? So, you know, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was not a financial success. And I think a lot of that is, there's a bunch of different reasons for that, always. But one of the reasons was people did not know that the game existed. And I still think most people don't know the game existed. I still think that this game actually does have an audience. There's a lot of people out there who like Advance Wars. And I think that Advance Wars players, a lot of them would like this game. It's got that turn-based crunchy tactics thing. It's got cute visuals. And I think that a lot of them would be like, yeah, this is cool. But a lot of them just don't know the game exists. That brings me to my next regret about this game. My next regret about this game actually is, and it kind of goes back to the question of like, you know, what is a tactics game? So there's two angles I could come at it from. I should have either made it a tactics game called Gem Wizards Tactics and made it a video game. And by that, I mean like kind of like an RPG. So like, by that, I also would classify something like XCOM. XCOM still has that like kind of long form sort of RPG structure where your units are leveling up. This game, it has a short campaign mode where your units can level up a little bit, but it's really not like the other modes. Your units don't level up at all, pretty much. Like it's not an RPG in that sense. It's very much more like a war game. And so I would have done one of two things. One, make it an RPG and make it a video game in several ways. Not just in terms of in terms of the structure and the presentation. It means many things. So that's one option. Or two, option two would have been make it a war game. And if it's a war game, build the aesthetics in a way that will appeal to fans of war games. So I now understand a little bit better than I did, I guess, when I started this, that there is an audience for war games, but they're not looking for a game that looks like this. You know, the war game audience, as I understand it, likes historical games. They like games that are pretty like, you know, terrestrial and dry and kind of like a lot of gray and brown, desaturated, not chibi, not cute, not anime, not Nintendo. You know, it's just a very different aesthetic. And that's not always, but I think that, you know, numbers wise, that's where the largest chunk of war game fans' aesthetics tend to swirl around. Whereas so I do think that this aesthetic, I kind of shot myself in the foot. What I was wanting to do was to introduce a bunch of like, I don't know, general interest gamers to a war game, to a like hex-based crunchy tactical war game, by using Advance Wars style art and stuff like that. But what I ended up doing was alienating my core audience. I remember when I got started on this game, because I'm the kind of designer who, like, I don't usually design in a genre. I usually work like 100 Rogues was very much a roguelike, but Oro is sort of its own thing. Empire was like, I guess it's a 4X, but it's kind of weird. And I spent a few years working on this totally bonkers game called Escape the Omnocronom, which you can't really play. You can find it on itch still. It's like very weird experimental game. But then when I made this, I was like, I really wanted to be in a genre. It would be so cool to have you know, an audience that already was interested in what I was doing. Like I could signal to them like, this game is for you right off the bat. I was very excited about that. But then I think I shot myself in the foot by then making it all cute and colorful, because I think a lot of Wargamer fans just aren't into this sort of aesthetic. So, the other route I could have gone was go full video game and make it more of an RPG. Make the characters a little bit bigger on screen, make there be fewer of them, make them have more fancy abilities, like, you know, make them level up more, and more story built into the actual thing. More, you know, like a typical video game where you have like the first part of the game is sort of tutorial, and then it builds into that and it goes into the story, and then it opens up a little bit more and becomes like, you know, and then eventually you beat the game and you move on. Whereas I was like, the mode I worked on most in this game is this single player ranked mode, where like I have this vision of a one player strategy game, you know, competitive one player strategy game where you start a match. It's like playing chess. You know, you start a match, you're going to either win or lose. That's the end of it. And then you can, you know, you'll rank up. And as you rank up from winning more games, the game is getting harder. As your rank is rising. Oro has this system as well. I call it its single player ELO. But basically, as you win more matches, the game gets harder. As you lose more matches, the game gets easier. We're trying to like find a 50% win rate for you at one player. Now, I have come to understand that this is something that's very cool and interesting to me, but there is not a huge audience that wants that. Most people playing one player video games really want a at least somewhat narrative system. They want some amount of progression, and they want a clear off ramp. They want, like, you know, to beat the game, right? And this was a play forever kind of Tetris like experience almost. So yeah, that was probably, I should have done one of those two things. And so right now it's in this kind of weird middle area. Another issue is, and people disagree about this in my community, but for me, I think the game is a little bit too calculation-y. And this is a minor issue, because I think the game is great. As I said, the gameplay is very strong. But I think for a lot of players, going through a whole match of this game is very like, whew, it's like playing StarCraft. It's like a real, you know, you're just constantly brain burning, you know, like looking at all these possibilities and comparing different possibilities and trying the weird thing out. And it's a lot. It's like, it's not smooth. I really wanted it to be smooth. Advance Wars is smooth. But this game is very like the grid, part of it's the larger grid, which I was very excited about having. I felt like a lot of tactics games have a very tiny grid, and that bothers me because I feel like you can't really do anything on them. And then some tactics games have a massive grid, and that's a nightmare because it takes like 3-4 turns of just moving your guys towards the position. I hate that too. So this was like a middle amount of size of the maps in this game, where let's see if I can get one that shows this kind of shows you, some of them are like 18 across, 20 across, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's, oh, here we go. Yeah, this is a smaller map for this game, but even still, it's like, you know, and we have Fog of War. At least at the start of the match, it starts like this, and you can just see the objective, by the way, is to capture these flags. That's how you win. You capture 2 flags, you win. You lose all your units, you lose. That's the basics of the game. There's also some cool rules, like when you capture a flag, you get different bonuses depending on what the flag is on the flag, or, you know, the icon is on the flag. You can also rescue units. These here are rescues. I think there was a picture of a rescue in another one of these screenshots here. Oops. Let's see, where is that guy? Yeah, this guy right here. He's a rescue. So if I just walk adjacent to him, I can add him to my squad. So that created some like good comeback mechanics and things like that. But yeah, it's even with the fog, it's a lot to calculate. And I have some ideas on how I would fix that for if I made a sequel. I will say, if I ever make a sequel to this game, it would be a lot more RPG-like. and a lot more video gamey. That's the direction I would go, because that's what appeals to me. You know, I love video games. I'm much more of a video gamer than a board gamer or than a war gamer for that matter. Yeah, so that's the direction I would go with that. There is this other question about like hexes. So this is a hex-based war game. And I felt pretty passionate about it. My Oro is also a hex-based game. And my first game was squares. It was 100 rogues. But the reason I did that was because it was on iPhone, and I thought that it would be easier to, if you only had 4 directions you could move, it would be easier to not have a misclick. I've always thought hexes were just like kind of superior. And I do think that from a pure gameplay perspective, like pure interactive merit, or, you know, just tactics, like how interesting are the tactics and that kind of thing, I do think hexes are better than squares. However, I sort of feel like they're just kind of not worth it. You would be surprised how many people I've encountered in my career of people who just have like a really, to me it seems irrational, like level of like disgust at the sight of hex tiles. There's a lot of people who are just like, that has hexes and therefore it looks very boring to me. And, you know, especially for this game, I was very surprised by that, because I worked hard to make the hexes look like inviting and charming and fun. And, you know, like if you look, they're kind of rounded off here. They're not like, they're not like harsh, you know, because I understand, like, if you just look at like a harsh pixel grid of hexes, that can look very like mathematical and like inhuman. So I worked really hard to try to make them less that. That's how you talk. But I think that it's just, there's something about hexes that just doesn't appeal to people, and or to a lot of people. I'm sure there are people out there who are like, oh, it has hexes, that sounds awesome, I want to play that. But I have not heard from any such people. I've only heard from people who, when they talk about hexes, it's almost always negative. So I will not be making another game with hexes in them. To me, it's just not worth it. And if I were going to go into the war game world, you know, if I was going to make like a true like war gamers war game, I would use hexes. But for making a video game, like for making a fun, colorful video game, indie video game, stay away from hexes. It's just not worth it. So that's another little tidbit. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's most of what I've got to talk about with this game. I learned a lot of big lessons, I think, in this game, in the making of this game. I do think that so much about video games is about the production values, is about the presentation, and about signaling of certain things. And, you know, when I made this game, I was kind of like, anytime you have a one-person team trying to build like a full-featured large video game application, that person's going to be kind of on the back foot. They're going to be they're like playing catch up constantly, you know, because they don't have the resources really to fully do any of the many things that need to be done. So for example, one of my big regrets about this game is the UI. And I redid the UI many, many times. And the UI works fine, but it's just kind of ugly, and it doesn't communicate something. So the exact opposite of this UI would be the UI from Persona 5, which is like the most stylish. Like, they use every second of where the UI is on screen to express something about the game and what the game is all about spiritually. And what that takes is like man hours, like development of concepts. I mean, it takes talent, you know, and I'm not saying I'm like a great UI UX designer either, but even if I were, it would take me, you know, a good like month or two of just working on the UI and like iterating on it, iterating, play testing and going back and, you know, building mood boards and just doing so many things to try to capture what is this UI all about? What are we looking at? And there just wasn't the bandwidth for that. And everything in this game is a little bit like that. I would say, except for the gameplay, because the gameplay itself, the actual balance, that was the thing that I was most interested in. Really, I focused so hard on that and making it the 5 factions like balanced with each other and interesting. All of them are interesting to play in a different way, having their own unique play styles, and you know, making sure that the monsters are providing a good challenge regardless of your level of rank, and you know, balancing things like fire, for example. Fire spreads like in an emergent kind of way, making sure that didn't spread too much or too little. It also leaves these like gray tiles behind, and making, what do those mean? You know, like do those reduce your, what if you're standing on a destroyed tile? What does that do? Does that reduce your mobility? Does it reduce your armor? There was just so many questions like that, and so many of those we just went over and over and over and over it. So that was the most of my time was spent doing all that kind of stuff. Now that also makes me very excited to someday make a sequel to this, because we can draw from a lot of that and just really focus on that presentation this time. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've got to talk about today. I should mention that I've also made some tabletop board games. In 2019, I did a board game called Dragon Bridge, which you can now play with rules enforced on BGA, Board Game Arena. I've actually been playing a lot of games of that, and so that's pretty cool. And I'm making another game that's like another tabletop game that's going to be a Kickstarter next year, and that is called Spellstorm. And that's like it's got some of this tactical bumping stuff that's in Dragon Bridge and in this and in Oro. That's kind of my thing, is like bouncing actors in different directions and to create different scenarios and effects and stuff, emergent complexity and things like that. And so Spellstorm will be hitting Kickstarter next year. And yeah, I've got some other stuff in the works, but I'm not working on a sequel to this just yet, but I really want to. So that, we'll see how it goes next year. Maybe I'll start looking into that. But I do want to say thank you to the TactiCon crew for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all about this game. If you have questions, I'm very easily reachable. Just go to keithburgun.net. You can go to my Discord. You can find me on Twitter. You can email me, and it's all pretty easy to find. But thank you so much for watching, and good luck to everyone involved in TactiCon, and yeah, see you next time.